Welcome, everybody, to the Strangelandpodcast. I'm your co-host, Kenny. I'm here with my friend, Stefan. And how you doing tonight, Stefan?
I'm doing great, man. Good to be here.
Awesome. So this is the 12th episode of this podcast. And, we're getting an okay amount of downloads and feedback. But I want anyone who is listening that wants to do this, please send us an email at thestrangelandpodcast@gmail.com. thestrangelandpodcast@gmail.com, because we just want to talk to people and we want feedback and we want to talk and see, what you like about the show, what you don't like about the show. And it's something that we would really like to discuss with anyone who's willing to.
Yeah, let us know.
Yeah. So next week is actually this coming weekend is Mother's Day, and we didn't plan this episode around that. It's just a really weird coincidence. Someone who listens to the show sent us an email saying we should do a Mother's Day or Father's Day episode. And this episode we're doing today, we had already planned on doing it, and then we realized that it's Mother's Day this Sunday.
Yeah, it was sort of a weird coincidence. Happened.
Yeah, so super interesting. But tonight we are talking about Darlie Routier. And this actually happened in our backyard. We're from Dallas, Texas. This happened in Rowlett, Texas. We live in a suburb of Dallas, Texas. And so this happened, in Rowlett, maybe 20 minutes away from where we're sitting right now, right? Half an hour, maybe?
Yeah, I looked it up. It's 38 minutes.
Yeah. So this is a story just from our backyard.
Definitely.
So this is the story of the murders of Devin and Damon Routier. And this is a story also about a family, again, who lives in Rowlett. The mother's name is Darlie Routier. The children are Devin and Damon Routier, and a 7-month-old baby named Drake. And also the husband of Darlie, Darren.
Lots of D's in this family.
Yeah, the entire family is just D. Routier. And this is a case that honestly divided so many people, and everyone has a different opinion. I would say a majority of the people have generally one. They sort of side to one, side of this. Most people sort of, lean towards one side of the outcome for this.
Right.
But there's a lot of people who don't. In fact, when we talk to people at work about it, I mean, yeah, there's a couple people that are like, she didn't do it, and there's a couple people that are, she did do it for sure, and then, some people
all in between.
All in between. My mom, who's like super opinionated about this sort of thing, and she knows everything about true crime. And she doesn't know.
Right.
This is like, and she was like 100% Casey Anthony. Casey Anthony killed Kaylee. She's like, hard about that, but she doesn't know in the case of Darlie Routier.
Well, and I'm, with that being said, I'm interested to, I guess we'll wait till the end to really talk about it, but I'm interested to see where you have fallen on this case. We specifically don't talk about it, by the way, for the audience. So because we just think it's interesting.
Yeah. So we'll see at the end. We're going to kind of go over our theories with this episode, and yeah, my theories are, kind of everywhere with this one. So
yeah, same.
So let's go ahead and get started with this.
All right, so the Routier family lived in their home in a nice neighborhood located in Rowlett, as we talked about earlier. So the Routier family lived in their home in a nice neighborhood located in Rowlett, Texas, as we mentioned earlier. For the most part, this was just a normal family that lived in a cul-de-sac. I mean, these guys were suburban livers for the most part. Darren and his wife Darlie got married at an early age, and they had 3 children. So Devin, Damon, and Drake, who were 6 years old, 5 years old, and 7 months, respectively. There's quite a bit of home footage of the couple depicting them to be a loving and happy couple. So, like I said, they met when they were in high school. Darlie was just 15 years old when she met Darren. So, like I said, the couple had met in high school and they appeared to be living this American dream. The couple decided to get married when Darren was 20 and Darlie was 18. After Darren's computer business takes off, the family purchased a 2-story home in an upscale neighborhood. So their neighbors described them as fairly happy. However, some of them had heard rumors going around that the couple actually fell on hard times due to living beyond their means. Darlie even admits in her journal, several months before the events we'll talk about in today's episode, she had planned to kill herself. In an entry, she apologizes to her husband and children for having to leave them. When later asked about the journal entry, Darlie's husband, Darren, explains that he never thought that Darlie would have actually gone through with the act, but she was just influenced by baby blues. So as normal as the family actually seemed from an outside perspective, life as they know it would drastically change all of their lives in just a single night.
Yeah, and one thing about that, when he says baby blues, it's postpartum depression, and that's really postpartum depression is a really serious thing that a lot of older doctors still don't really believe in, but it can have wild effects on a woman after she gives birth. 6 months to a year, it's something that can be really, really bad.
Yeah, it's no joke, and it changes so drastically from person to person too.
Yeah, so you kind of have to really be you really have a watchful eye, and a lot of people still don't even really know about it. A lot of fathers, husbands,
Right.
don't really know, and even mothers and wives after they have a kid, not a lot of them don't really understand it. So it's something that can really, really drastically affect how a woman behaves after she gives birth.
And I guess we should mention, she had just recently given birth. She had the 7-month-old named Drake, just to put it into perspective.
Exactly. So on June 6th, 1996, at 2:31 in the morning, the police received a frantic call from Darlie Routier. Darlie was screaming frantically and told the dispatch operator to send police because her 2 children had just been stabbed. Darlie was hysterical and clearly upset. She repeated over and over again that her babies were dying, all while the 911 operator was trying her best to calm her down. Darlie explained that while her and her children slept downstairs, an intruder entered their house and stabbed her 2 children, Devin, who again was 6, and Damon, who was 5, and then stabbed her before leaving. During the 911 call, you can hear the child's father, Darren, in the background asking, "When are they coming and where are they?" Talking about the police and the ambulance. 3 minutes later, the police arrive at the Routier residence. The Rowlett police walked into a blood-stained scene of horror. The police conducted a search of the property to look for the perpetrator. When they came up with nothing, police allowed the paramedics to enter the house and tend to the victims.
So when the police enter, they find young Devin Routier face down on the floor. Devin was already dead when they got to him. He was stabbed twice in the chest and sustained injuries to his heart and lungs. His brother Damon was found 12 feet away from him with 6 stab wounds in his back, but Damon was still alive. Clinging to life, he was weak and still in shock from the attack. His lungs and liver were punctured. Damon was rushed to Baylor University Hospital but died just before he arrived in the emergency room. The knife wounds were said to have gone completely through the bodies of the boys, literally piercing the 2 children to death. Their father later explained that when he attempted to give Damon resuscitation by giving him mouth-to-mouth, he actually felt his own breath that he blew in escape through the wounds on his son's chest, forcing blood to spray all over him. Darlie was also rushed to the hospital and treated for superficial wounds to her neck and arms. Darlie's arms and hands were terribly bruised all the way up to her armpits, and she had a slash-type wound on her neck and upper chest that was created from the knife that killed her children. Stab wounds were also found on her wrist that went down to the bone. So, these wounds are pretty crazy, and this is a terrible, brutal act.
Yeah, and what's interesting is when I was listening to everything, the prosecutors were saying, and now this is not in trial, this is, after the trial happened, I believe, that basically Darlie was admitted to the hospital and she left after 2 days of being there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think 2 days after she got out of the hospital, she went down to the police station to talk to them for whatever reason. And then they said that they saw bruises up on her arms.
Right.
But, and then when they go back and ask doctors and nurses, the doctors and nurses don't remember bruising on her arms being that significant.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that will make sense too if, bruises don't form immediately. You know what I mean? It takes a little bit for them to form, but I take your point that like anything could have happened in the time.
I think something that we'll see throughout this case is, I think the bruises and the wounds that Darlie sustained during this attack are very substantial to the case, and so we kind of have to look at those pretty deeply. And I think we will later, more so.
Yeah, definitely. I should also mention when Darlie's injury that went from her neck onto her upper chest, it actually missed her main artery, her carotid artery, by 2 millimeters. I mean, just barely. Her necklace actually stopped the blade from
going that deep.
Exactly.
They were saying that, the doctors and nurses were saying that cut in particular, if it had gone 2 millimeters further in, it would have, she would have bled out in minutes. And so we sort of just went over with you, the main, accusations in this case, the main crime. So Darlie says she's sleeping downstairs on the couch. And the reason she's sleeping is because her 7-month-old Drake was waking her up from upstairs. So I guess Drake was making too much noise and she couldn't sleep, so she came downstairs and slept. Meanwhile, her 2 other children were also sleeping downstairs with her. And her story is someone broke into their house sometime between 1:30 and 2 o'clock in the morning and stabbed the kids. And then attempted to attack her and then fled.
Right.
Yeah. And, she says, well, someone came in to burglarize the house. Right. And we'll talk more about that later. But this is the main story. Someone breaks into their house in a rich neighborhood in Rowlett, Texas, on a cul-de-sac at 2 in the morning and stabs the kids and then attacks her with quote-unquote superficial wounds and then leaves. And so that's where we're at right now. So after further investigation of the house, police found a screen from a window in the garage that had been cut with a knife. They hypothesized that the intruder must have entered through that window and came in through the back of the house. In the kitchen, they found the knife holder to be missing just one knife, which happened to match the size of the murder weapon used in the Routier home. It was about a 10-inch, probably butcher knife. They later discovered the knife on the kitchen counter covered in blood. And as a matter of fact, the entire crime scene seemed to have copious amounts of bloodshed everywhere. The carpet in the living room of the home was soaked in blood splatter everywhere. In the kitchen, investigators also found a bloody boot print. 75 yards away from the residence, located in the alley behind their house, police found a bloody sock that belonged to Darlie next to one of their neighbors' trash cans. A few of the neighbors claimed that they kept seeing a dark-colored sedan driving around the neighborhood throughout the night as well. And actually, did that sock belong to Darlie or the husband?
I mean, it may have been the husband's sock, but it had her DNA on it.
And it had both blood from both the children who were stabbed on the sock as well?
Yep.
Okay. And now this sock is found 75 yards away in an alley.
Yeah, and 75 yards. I mean, when you think, that's pretty long. Like, if you think about it, like a football field, right, is 100 yards. 75 yards is pretty far away.
Yeah, well, and we'll kind of go over that a little bit more later.
Right. So, as we were saying, police are horrified when they walk in, and they're not used to dealing with such a devastating type of crime scene. After all, this is the second double homicide or multiple murder that the Rowlett Police Department has ever responded to in its history. When Darlie's mother is alerted by a neighbor regarding to what had happened, She leaves her house and arrives around 3:30 in the morning, and she describes the Routier residence as basically a chaotic flow of medical professionals and police going in and out of the house. It's said that a lot of the evidence in this case was mishandled. I mean, blood was smeared all through the walkways of the house. Boot prints were made by investigators and forensics teams, which I don't blame them for. It's just, it would be really hard to do with the amount of blood that was in the house. But so as they look more and more, they realize that nothing seemed to have been stolen in the house. And surprisingly enough, Darlie's jewelry is actually even laid out on the counter untouched, which is just so weird.
Well, it's weird. It's weird that anyone imagines that anyone's breaking into a house to steal stuff at 2 a.m. It's even
weirder to me that she laid, like, all of her jewelry was laid out on the counter. Who does that? Like, in the kitchen. Who does that?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And that's the thing, too. The thing with everyone, all the paramedics and the police officers coming in the house, that's something that honestly can be a big issue. And like you said, you can kind of understand it, but at the same time, you see some crime scenes that are, treated very professionally, that there isn't a lot of, tampering with evidence,
right.
Even not on purpose, but even accidental. There's not a lot of, people just walking through and leaving prints of their own and leaving their own fingerprints and stuff. And then you see some crime scenes that are just not done very well. I think this is one of those that probably wasn't done very well.
Agreed.
People are just kind of going everywhere and leaving stuff and moving things and taking evidence and whatever. It can really hurt an investigation.
They were taking pictures of evidence that had already been moved. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So then when you see those pictures later, you start to form a picture that might be incorrect because you don't know exactly where that evidence was originally laid.
And people's lives are on the line at that point.
Exactly. So when Darlie woke up in the hospital, 2 police officers were waiting for her, and she had gave her statement to police. She explained that she had fallen asleep with her 2 sons downstairs while watching TV. She was abruptly woken by a man attacking her, attempting to cut her throat. After a struggle, the person she described as a white male left through the back of the house, leaving the murder weapon behind by dropping it in the utility room. Darlie began to follow the man out, and in her pursuit, she stumbled upon the knife he had dropped on the ground earlier. She swiftly picked it up and set it on the kitchen counter. At this time, she decidedly checked on her children and was shocked when she discovered them in their gruesome state. In a panic, she began screaming, waking her husband, who quickly made his way downstairs to find his family. He immediately began to try and revive his sons, while Darlie made the 911 call. The couple's third child, 7-month-old Drake, remained unharmed through the events as he slept upstairs peacefully in his crib.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to mention here is during the 911 call, she keeps saying it, "They killed my babies," which is not a consistent story with everything she has said afterwards. And I thought that was an interesting choice of words. I understand she was in a panic, but I think it's interesting just as a theory. She said they killed my babies.
Yeah.
She's screaming and yelling.
And the thing is, I said that she was woken up by a man attacking her. And I'm not sure if we're going to go over this later in detail, but didn't she also say at some point that she was woken up by her son?
Well, yes, but her story changes.
Exactly. Yeah. Her story. Okay, good. So her story changes, and also the wine glass. Isn't that
right.
what woke up Darren in the first place upstairs? He said, I remember listening to interviews of Darren. He was upstairs sleeping, and he said he heard a faint crash.
Right.
And it was supposedly a wine glass had fallen off a rack. And this is all really, really weird anyways. For one thing, this guy comes in. This intruder, quote unquote intruder, comes in and says, and they say he comes in and just attacks the 2 kids, attacks her, and then makes his way out. He doesn't mess up anything. You know, it's funny because we just covered Richard Ramirez in the last episode.
Right.
And this is like a Richard Ramirez crime. I mean, this is exactly what Richard Ramirez
Totally.
did. He would go through, break into someone's house, and kill the people inside.
Brutally.
Brutally, right? You know, one thing that Richard Ramirez always left? The place a mess.
Yeah.
And he always took things. So
Yeah.
nothing was taken from this house. Nothing was robbed. There was no theft. And the intruder left everything basically, except for one wine glass and supposedly the vacuum cleaner, untouched. And if you look at the rack that this wine glass was on, there's a bunch of other things on this rack, little bottles or little like salt and pepper, you know, those sort of things
Right.
on this rack, and nothing is knocked over except this one single wine glass. And so that's curious in a general sense. Why would this one wine glass get knocked over?
Right.
And why was nothing taken, especially with the jewels sitting there? And yeah.
So, I guess we should mention this as well. So, 8 days after the murders, the Routier family had a celebration for their deceased sons, as it would have been Devin's 7th birthday. The Routier family members gathered at the gravesite, where the two boys were buried together holding hands. News channels were invited to the event and permitted to record the family's interactions. Police were also involved, as they had bugged the gravesite so they could hear the interactions between the family members. They also obtained video recordings of the family, evidently without their knowledge and from some distance away. The police recorded the Routier family crying, telling stories, and even having a conversation with the family pastor. One video clip that would end up being sensationalized was taken from the news. It contained footage of Darlie Routier smacking gum, smiling, and spraying silly string over her children's graves. This very clip would eventually be the metaphorical nail in Darlie's coffin. It would be used over and over again in the media and in her trial, and play a huge role in the case. When police see the recording, they're convinced that Darlie has committed this crime herself, and they immediately start to pursue her.
You know, well, for one thing, just to say that they suspected Darlie 30 minutes into the investigation. Like that
Right.
morning when they got there and they started looking at everything, they realized that there was no intruder. There was zero evidence for an intruder.
But this specific
Yeah.
clip really put fire under their butts to be like, okay, we
Yeah.
know exactly there's no shadow of a doubt here.
No.
They really pursued her hard.
Yeah, and here's the thing. So I have an opinion on this. You know, in trial, they showed her doing this over and over again.
Right.
And if you read, you know, stuff about the trial and you read about the jury, you know, this was a metaphorical nail in the coffin, you know, in the trial and in, you know, the public's opinion on her.
Right.
And I actually don't think, taken out of context or, you know, within the correct context, I don't think it's that big of a deal. I actually remember this from when I was a kid. I remember, because this is right down the street, and I remember seeing all this in the news, and I remember it happening. My mom, again, she's a real big true crime fan, so she was all about this case. And I remember seeing clips of this, and I remember thinking as a kid, I was like, man, that is fucked up. Why would this happen? Why are they doing this? Taking out of context. The thing is, you know what they didn't show the jury in trial? Hours before that of them crying and mourning
Yeah.
and having a proper funeral and all of this stuff, which they have recordings of.
Right.
Darlie, like you've said, Darlie didn't bring, or at least you told me this before we started recording. Darlie didn't bring the silly string; her sister did.
Right.
Right, and it's like they're celebrating the birthday. I just don't see how, after spending a day of mourning and spending a day of crying and spending a day and a week now, really, just in sadness, deep sadness, why they aren't allowed to celebrate the birthday of this child.
Right.
You know, that's
And another point to go with you right along is Darlie was also on medication at this point in time as well, let alone her family wasn't, right? They were with her. But she was, and she did look happy. I mean, in the video, she was smiling, but I
it's
guess
like you
it
don't
was her one little bit of peace maybe
exactly.
she could have.
I mean, honestly, I don't know if I react like this. I really don't know. But after all of the sadness and mourning of her two children, and I'm not saying that she's innocent or that she's guilty. I'm just saying if she were to be innocent and her two children, if I had two kids and I have a stepdaughter, but if I had two kids and they both were killed in any way, I would mourn for probably ever, but I would try to take, I at least think this, I would try to take little bits that I could to make light of the situation and to, bring happiness to everyone involved. And I feel like that's kind of what this is. I just don't, I see how badly it looks, especially out of context, which everything was out of context for this entire, throughout the media and through the trials, all completely out of context. I can see how it looks bad, but if you just stop and think about it for a minute, it's really not as bad as it looks. It could be, I guess, but I don't think that it is. So.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is where I'm at. I say I wouldn't personally do that, but that doesn't mean somebody else shouldn't do that. You know what I mean? That's not my style. I wouldn't be the type to do that, but I can at least empathize on where she's coming from, and it does seem crazy out of context.
Exactly.
Definitely.
It does seem crazy out of context. I just think that the media and the prosecutors and everyone took this one clip of her doing this way too far.
Right.
It should never have been used in trial, for one thing. Not only because it was illegal, that the bugging, the audio bugging, that was not legal, right? So...
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't necessarily illegal either.
Yeah,
but
that's the weird thing. It's sort of this weird gray area.
Yeah, I mean...
But I don't think it should have been used in trial, personally. I don't know.
Well,
if they used that in trial, they should have used the hours of mourning beforehand.
That's the biggest deal here is that, they show this one clip that's so damning, but they don't show the other side of it as well. And it was very one-sided.
Yeah, it just makes the prosecution look morally corrupt. Which, whatever,
right.
A lot of them are, but it's like, it just makes you look bad because it just makes you look like you don't know if she's innocent or guilty or not, but you just want to make her look like she is.
Right, and this woman is literally collapsing on the ground, upset, crying, but that's not what they decide to use.
Exactly. So just 12 days after the murders, under their own free will, Darlie and Darren went to the police station and offered their written statements. They did not have a lawyer at this time, and when questioned about the reason why, Darlie smugly replied, "Innocent people don't need lawyers."
Yes, they do.
Yeah, no shit. They definitely do. Despite what they said, the couple would, of course, need lawyers. When giving her written account of the events, Darlie changed her story regarding the night. Instead of saying that she was awakened by the intruder trying to kill her, Darlie tells police that she is awakened by her son, Damon, who is tapping on her chest. Then she states she sees a man toward her feet walking away from her. This is where she begins to chase the intruder out, and he allegedly drops the knife in the utility room before escaping from the residence, never to be seen again. And by the way, you need a lawyer.
Yeah,
dude,
always.
I'm going to keep saying this. I've said it. I think I said it last episode.
Yeah.
Like, dude, fucking get a lawyer.
I think you've said it in a couple episodes now.
Like, dude, I don't care. If you are taken into the police station and questioned, get a lawyer. I don't care if you're innocent or guilty. It does not matter, because you look at some cases and innocent people will go to prison because they are bad at talking to the police, and they will say something stupid and they will use that against you, and you will go to prison because of it. So you always need a lawyer. It does not matter if you're innocent or not.
Yeah. And lawyer up, everybody.
Exactly.
It's just good practice.
It's just safe.
When investigators searched the house, they couldn't find any evidence in the house to support the claim that there was indeed an intruder. The only possible evidence that could have led them to believe that there was were 3 bloody fingerprints that couldn't be positively matched to anyone in the Routier family. This isn't to say that the fingerprint didn't belong to any of the family members, it just couldn't be proven without a shadow of a doubt that it came from them. Another interesting claim that was made by Darlie was that the murder weapon was actually dropped by the intruder while he was on his way out in the utility room. Though most of the movements could be traced using the blood evidence, like we mentioned earlier, there's blood smeared everywhere. You know who's been where. Investigators find no evidence to support the claim that the knife was actually dropped in the utility room.
So while the couple were at the police station, they would both be interviewed by investigators. Darren would submit to a polygraph test and endured the police accusing him of killing his children. In an affidavit, Darren would admit that he took out 2 $5,000 life insurance policies on his children, as well as a $250,000 life insurance policy on his wife. He also admits that in the past he had a history of insurance fraud. He even offers to police that he indeed had talked to some of his neighbors about staging a robbery to collect insurance money. Only Darren would be able to leave the police station that day. Darlie was arrested for capital murder just 13 days after her children were killed. In her own words, she said that she felt betrayed by the police because she felt they made her out to be a cold-blooded killer from the beginning. And they did, but think about it. They get into the house, they start their investigation, and they see no evidence of an intruder from the very get-go. So yeah, they sort of, they did, but they're just doing police work.
Right, they're doing their jobs.
It's, when you go through all of this, it's fairly obvious that there was no intruder.
Or is it?
And here's the thing, I want to say something else. So just real quick, and I'll probably go back over this later.
Right.
Yeah, so the knife was left, right?
Yeah.
The knife that was used in the murders, they got from the house.
Yeah, they took it from the house.
Which you see people do.
Sure.
Again, Rich Ramirez did it all the time. If he stabbed someone, he got it from
right.
the knife
Richard
from the kitchen.
Ramirez didn't go prepared, man. He just
He had
went
a gun.
into the house.
He had a gun, right?
Yeah.
But if he stabbed someone, it was with a knife from the house.
Right.
And so the same thing happened here. And remember the sock we talked about, 75? That was 75 yards away from the house. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the intruder, the quote unquote intruder that was in the house that stabbed the 2 kids and stabbed Darlie, left the knife, but somehow accidentally took a bloodstained sock 75 yards away, and accidentally left it just to be found in the alley. That doesn't make any sense. I just wanted to say that real quick because I was really thinking about that when we were reading it, and it's like, why would he leave the knife there? It doesn't make any... And then accidentally take a sock.
Yeah.
It's like, what does Darlie and Darren think happened to this sock? How do they even think this sock ended up in the alleyway in the first place? Doesn't make any sense.
I don't understand how that would have happened. However, I don't discount it. I mean, anything is crazy. This murder is crazy enough, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I take your point. That is super weird. Like, he leaves the jewelry, but he can take a sock.
Yeah, he leaves the jewelry. He leaves everything he was supposed to be in there for. He kills the kids, leaves the knife, takes the sock. Okay.
Right. Doesn't kill the wife, who's the biggest one. You would figure that would be your biggest target going in.
Yeah,
would be the bigger one.
Yeah, I'll talk about that in the theory section a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
The trial of Darlie Routier would begin on January 6, 1997, and will last about a month before the final deliberations were made. Routier would only be charged for the death of her 5-year-old child, Devin. Because of the law in the state of Texas, if a child under 6 years old is murdered, it automatically makes the defendant eligible for the death penalty. If the prosecution fails in their attempt to convict Darlie, they will try again, but this time for the murder of her other child, Damon. Worried about the media coverage and how the high-profile aspect of the case could poison the well, Routier's court-appointed attorney petitions, and the trial is moved outside of Dallas. This seems to be a major mistake for the defense, because the trial would now take place in the highly conservative town of Kerrville, Texas. The family is very worried at this point, and Darlie gets rid of her lawyer and hires one of the top criminal defense lawyers in Dallas by the name of Douglas Mulder. Doug's first move was to try and get the case moved back to Dallas, but the judge refuses to reconsider. The prosecution would argue that Darlie was depressed, materialistic, and a housewife who spent more money than her husband could make. They would also try and make the case that she blamed her children and formed malice for them because of their burdensome financial expenses. Prosecutors then make the case that there isn't sufficient evidence to support that there was an intruder, and it's much more likely that the person who killed the boys was likely to have been someone from inside the house. Since Darlie was the only eyewitness, and she hadn't accused her husband of the killing, the state concluded that she must have been the one who had killed her 2 children.
Another piece of compelling information was that Darlie's nightshirt that she was wearing the night of the murders had blood stains on the back of it, implicating that if she were to stab the kids, the force of her pulling her hand back in a stabbing motion would have led to the stains that were consistent with the blood stains. At one point during the trial, evidence showing that Darlie was at the kitchen sink was brought before the jury. Using luminol and DNA testing, forensic analysts were able to positively identify that the blood in and around the sink belongs to Darlie. The prosecution claims that this is where she attempts to slash her own throat. When a paramedic testifies, he says that when they arrive, they notice that at some points she is seen sobbing, but there are other times where she doesn't seem to be emotional at all. At no point is she said to have been hysterical, which is kind of weird because she was super hysterical during the 911 call.
Right.
Right. So when the silly string video is shown, jurors end up watching the clip 9 times. The video taken by police showing Darlie 2 hours prior to the silly string event, sobbing and collapsing on the ground in sorrow, like we said earlier, is not shown in court at all.
Yeah, and that's sort of a bomb drop. It's like you could tell at this point that they were really trying hard to paint a picture.
Oh yeah, and like you said earlier, they're painting this picture that she is this, she was 26 years old, which is weird to think about because I'm 27 now.
Right.
She's 26 years old, and her husband Darren had bought her breast implants, so she's this blonde, big-breasted woman who they paint her as being just this super materialistic, wanting to spend all sorts of money, and they painted it as they didn't have very much money. If you listen to prosecution interviews, they had less than $2,000 in the bank,
right?
Which is not like completely broke, but it's when you sort of look at the house they were living in, plus the cars and the boats that they had, and all of her jewelry and clothes and breast implants and all this crazy stuff, that's like nothing. And of course, Darren will say, that they had money, and he had like $25,000 in some other account or something.
Right.
But that's what the prosecutors, were trying to paint the picture to the jury.
So the defense argued that Darlie was under heavy medication during the silly string event, like we mentioned earlier, and that she was trying momentarily to escape from her reality by celebrating with her family. After all, Darlie's sister was the one who had brought the silly string in the first place. The news footage that would be used in court to paint her as a killer wasn't even her idea. Like, this idea she had nothing to do with. This was happenstance, basically.
Yeah, I mean, they went to the grave to pay respects and to celebrate her birthday. And like you said, her sister brought the silly string. So yeah, it wasn't even her idea at all. But the media was like, she brought silly string. She doesn't give a shit about her children. Blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay.
Right. Defense attorney Doug Mulder also states that the crime scene had been tampered with and treated very poorly, possibly destroying any evidence suggesting that there was an intruder. The defense also claimed that there would have been no way for Darlie to have killed her kids, cut the screen, plant the sock found 75 yards away, run back to the house, and then injure herself with a knife, all before calling the police. Douglas Mulder claimed that there just wasn't enough time using the prosecution's timeline to establish Darlie could have been able to do this. So,
So
if the murder happened, when she called, she was on the phone for 5 minutes after her kids were killed. The police arrived 3 minutes later, so that's 8 minutes in total. And they said that her kid could have only been able to survive about 10 minutes with those wounds. So that's where they basically say that there's no way she would have been able to do it in this amount of time, because she was on the phone for half of that time basically.
yeah, and supposedly Darren came down right after the intruder left.
Right.
But so Darren came down before she called 911, right?
Yes.
Okay.
It was when Darren started to give the kids resuscitation that's when she picks up the phone to call police.
So on February 1st, after just 10 hours of deliberation, Darlie is promptly charged with first-degree murder of her 5-year-old son and is handed down the sentence of being put to death by lethal injection. In Darlie's own words, she says, "I was just in belief, overwhelming disbelief. I could not believe that they had found me guilty." After she receives her sentence, friends and family of Darlie get very emotional and call the jury and prosecution murders in an act of passion. In May of 2000, the bodies of the two boys are exhumed from their resting place in an attempt to gain their fingerprints. Astonishingly, during the autopsy, the fingerprints were never taken from the boys. This is just one of many errors that affected the way this case, could or would have turned out. The only way to figure out if some of the prints that were believed to be the intruders could be put to rest, the court would need to positively prove that the unknown prints hadn't come from the Routier family, including the boys. So the experts that the Routier family hired have confirmed that the unknown fingerprints, hadn't come from either of the boys. Indication that there really had been an intruder. Darlie's lawyer, Stephen Cooper, would try and use this to get Darlie a new trial.
And we should also mention that since the trial has commenced, several jurors say that they don't remember seeing some of the evidence that was shown at the trial. Even some admit to changing their mind about the case after learning more about the details of the injuries that Darlie had sustained. This is probably because all of the information was so overwhelming for the jurors that some of the evidence was indeed shown, but it was buried among all of the other mountains of evidence they had used in the case, which is understandable.
And the reason that we know that that's a thing is because if you look, and they did interviews with certain jurors, like, I don't know, way after the trial had ended. I mean, could even be years after the trial ended. And they asked one juror if he had seen the pictures of her injuries, the injuries that she had sustained to her arms. And he said no. However, a different juror said yes, that we did see those. And she specifically remembers seeing the pictures of the bruises on her arms.
Right.
And the weird thing, that's why I said earlier that the wounds that she sustained, be it the bruises or the knife attack to her, the knife wound to her neck, are very, very important because the jury, says, like you just said, a lot of the jurors say that, they may have changed their mind about, something if they had actually seen all of the, pictures of all of her wounds.
Right.
Some weird things with that too. I just don't. One big thing that bothers me and that I think about a lot is if someone breaks into a house at 2 a.m. and they see, let's say they break into the house and they see 2 children and a mom and a woman laying all 3 of them are sleeping, supposedly laying in the living room. Why on earth would you ever go for the kids first?
Right.
I mean, maybe, I don't know if you have some idea, maybe someone could argue that with me and say, well, this is why. But if you break into a house and that's the scenario you come across, and you think you have to kill any of them, you would go for the mom first. If she's sleeping, why would you not just start stabbing her, right? Why would you go for the kids? Doesn't make any sense, because you can assume that once the kids start being attacked, the noise that makes, the noise that a child being attacked is going to create, will wake her up. And that's just common sense. I just don't see why anyone would do that first.
Well, it depends, right? So I'm right there with you, but you have to think about, if there was an intruder, what would be the intent? It obviously wasn't to rob. It's just weird. Like, I don't get it.
Was
either.
the intruder's intent just to kill kids?
To kill? I don't know.
I don't think so. I feel like, and this is just going off of, looking back at many cases of people that kill, including Richard Ramirez, you don't see them going for children first. It just doesn't make sense to do that. And in fact, a lot of cases, they won't even kill kids. Some people do. But a lot of cases, they sort of leave the kids. And this is, many cases that are like that. They'll kill the adults, especially first, or they'll kill the adults and leave the kids there to be alone, like BTK did.
Right.
It just doesn't make sense. What was this guy's purpose in the house to begin with? Was it just to kill kids and then leave? It just doesn't make any sense.
Right. Agreed. I will say, though, there was other reports of houses being broken into in that area. I don't know. I mean, they were robberies. Obviously, this wasn't a robbery. The person...
Yeah. This was definitely not a person. Yeah.
So, yeah, very interesting. I guess we should also mention as well, to this day, Darlie's story has not changed a bit. She still remains her innocence, although she doesn't talk much about the night in question. There are some interviews out there that you can find that have taken place over the years where you can sort of glean some sort of interesting perspectives into her mind. But, yeah, she still remains... I mean, in her eyes, innocent.
Of course she will, because she's on death row, and they are going through the appeals process to try to get her out.
Right.
And, she's been on death row for 20 years. 20 years, 21 years. It's, she's been on death row for 20, 21 years or so. It's like, what's going on? I mean, I don't think it usually takes that long to kill someone in Texas, right?
No, not at all.
Richard Ramirez was on death row for 25 years, but he's in California, and so I don't understand that.
Yeah, I think it goes to show how contentious it really is. I think people flip-flop on this case a lot.
So what do you think happened? I'm just going to go straight into it and say, what do you think happened?
Man, well, I mean, so I have a short answer and a long answer.
Sure.
The short answer is I have no fucking clue. I have no idea. I really don't. I'm so torn. The empathetic part of me wants to be like, listen, like, moms don't typically do this. There are cases like Susan Smith where people are driving their kids off of cliffs in their car and driving them into a lake and crazy stuff, but like stabbing someone is very intimate. It just seems like there could have been another way to do it. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Maybe.
And I will say this as well. If I heard this in one of the documentaries. The guy goes, either she didn't kill her kids or she's an Academy Award winning actress. And it's so true. Like, the way she talks about it, she's so passionate, and I don't know, she's a great actor if she did it.
Yeah. And the way I feel is I don't know exactly what happened either, and I don't think that anyone really knows. But I have two main theories, and neither one of them involve an intruder. And one sort of involves an intruder, actually.
Right.
Because so my first thing is that she just did it. Of course, she did it. There was no intruder.
But why?
I don't know. That's a good question. Well, what is the motive behind this?
Do you think she was crazy?
She could have been crazy. She could have been seriously suffering from some postpartum depression stuff.
Okay, fair enough.
And that's something that really can happen.
Sure.
And I think my second theory is that the husband. I don't think the husband did it, but if you watch interviews with the husband, just something doesn't seem right. And I know that's kind of a bullshit answer, but my idea is he only had $5,000 life insurance policies on the children. Right. He had a $250,000 life insurance
That's a lot of money.
policy on his wife. And if wives almost never kill their husbands for life insurance policies,
Right.
but husbands very often kill their wives for life insurance
Yeah,
policies.
it happens.
It's a thing that just happens. It's unfortunate, but it does. And my idea is if there was anyone in that house, he needed help. He or she, whatever, needed help, because there's no evidence that there's really no evidence that there was anyone in the house, right? The defense lawyers say that there was fingerprints.
Mm-hmm.
Have you actually ever seen? I mean, you said you saw like a Google image of a fingerprint, but do you know it wasn't any of theirs? Like, we don't know that. You know,
Right.
the defense team is trying to take that appeal to court to see if they can work on that and they can get a new trial. But we don't know how true it is, and to everything that was happening, to everything that we know, it's just there's not much evidence, if any at all, that there was anyone in that house.
Right.
So if there was, in fact, someone in that house, he or she was helped into the house and out of the house. Either possibly by the husband. For the story is that he was sleeping, but how do we know exactly how that happened? How do we know that that Darlie and the two kids weren't sleeping in the living room, and he was able to help someone come in? I don't know. And as far as the sock goes, being 75 yards away, that is a complete mystery to me.
Yeah.
That's very strange.
I still don't get that either. I think I agree with you. Well, okay, so this is like sort of my thought, right? So we took the $250,000 insurance policy out. Let's say, in my theory, he knew he was going to kill Darlie. To make it look less obvious, he decides to get 2 other insurance policies out on his kids that are a short amount, a small amount of money, but looks like, like on the up and up, like he's making sure everything is okay. That makes sense to me why he would do that, because a lot of people say, why would he take 2 $5,000 insurance policies? And I agree. Why would he kill his kids for that, except to maybe cover up?
Maybe, and that's really the question too, with the theory that the dad hired someone to come in and do this. Is that why would the kids be killed? I mean, the question that I have, or not the question I have, the thing that I think is so weird about that theory, again, is the fact that they killed the children first and Darlie wasn't killed.
Right.
Like,
Darlie's known to be a light sleeper as well. They talk about that.
Yeah, like what kind of shit? If Darren, the husband, hired someone to come in and kill Darlie, they did an awful job. They killed the 2 kids and didn't kill Darlie. So that theory is one that I sort of like to play around with, but I don't really think that it's too accurate, because they just did such a poor job.
Right.
And also, when it comes to her wounds, why are there no wounds to the face? Why would you come in and attack her? How are the wounds on her arms getting there, for one thing? Where are those wounds coming from?
Mm-hmm.
Why are there no wounds to the face? If I'm a man and I have to beat up a 5 foot, 5 whatever, however tall she was, lady, I'm gonna take her down and hit her in the face and then fucking stab her. It's like the wounds that she has seem life threatening on the surface, but I just don't think that they match up with someone attacking her that
I
well.
think it is entirely possible that she could have killed the kids, and then when she realized what she had done, try and cut her own throat. But then, once she made that cut, and she was scared and blood was going everywhere. She had like changed her mind.
Are you saying that she didn't know that while she was doing it that she was doing it, and then when she realized that she had done it?
No, I think she was probably if she had done it, she knew what she was doing. Not, you know what I mean? Like I don't think she was in some sort of slumber. I think she was aware of what she was doing, but
and she then decided to take her life as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And maybe, the thing with the diary, in the diary, again, like we said, she says that she wants to take her life, and she apologizes to Darren, and she apologizes to her children. And that was, a month and a half before this month before this incident. And so you don't know what could have changed her mind in that time period, and she decided to take her children with her as well. You just don't know. And the problem I have with the intruder theory is it just doesn't make sense. Like, nothing about the intruder theory makes sense. Why? I'm going to say this a million times, but no one's breaking into this house at 2 a.m. And when they do, and they see the two children and the mom sleeping there, they're not attacking the kids first. They're not taking jewelry. They're not leaving the weapon behind. They're not leaving any type of DNA or any type of evidence that they were there.
Yeah.
It's just
they were being as sloppy as possible without leaving evidence.
Exactly, and you kill the children first, and then somehow don't kill the adult. And also, she says that she was downstairs sleeping because she couldn't fall asleep because of the 7-month-old Drake was making too much noise upstairs. But her children dying in the same room as her doesn't wake her up, right? And then her story changes a million times.
Story changes.
It's just...
Which happens with traumatic events. Let's be fair. People's memories are terrible. We always say that on every show, but...
My theory is there was no real intruder, and it was either Darlie or Darren.
Agreed.
And why is the good question. It's just there's not enough evidence for me to say that, yes, it was probably... an intruder.
See, for Darren, I see more motive. For Darlie, like the only place I can get to in my head is that she was crazy. She did it in an act of psychosis. But for Darren, I can see it being financially motivated.
But and again, the problem with that is she didn't die.
Right.
Financially, it would be good for him because he would get the $250,000 life insurance. But, it didn't work.
Right, it didn't work.
And the person didn't kill her, but killed the kids. That doesn't make any sense, right? Totally. Unless he was just like, kill all 3 of them.
Right, which he could have. I guess we should also mention that this guy has a past of insurance fraud. This is why it's so sketchy. He had collected... he had got someone to essentially steal his Jaguar. A guy had a Jaguar, and then he collected the money on it. So he was a known insurance, scammer.
Yeah, and they talked to there was a neighbor that they had that supposedly had said that Darren came to him and said, "Hey, look, I want you to come into my house and steal all of my things, like all my furniture. Right. And we're going to move them to a different location. We're going to collect the insurance money on all this furniture. And then once we get the money, we bring the furniture back." And the problem with that idea is, who the fuck is coming into a house at 2 a.m. and stealing furniture?
Right.
Well, that's just not happening. Right.
It's a little loud.
Yeah. So that doesn't make any sense. I mean, the idea that maybe he had planned something like that is interesting. But I don't think that it has anything to do with the events that took place that night.
Right. They also they got divorced. I think 13 years after she was in prison, he filed for divorce and they split up. He's remarried now.
Yeah.
With a different wife who he also bought fake boobs. Just an interesting fact. You can take that one home.
And in one of the interviews, with Darlie, that was not that long ago in prison. I think, it was like 10 years ago, I guess, or something. They asked her if she would remarry Darren? And she said no. And when they asked why, she said, well, it's because I found out things about him after I was
I
prison.
thought that was interesting.
And they were like, what'd you find out? And she said that he had tried to hire someone to break into our house and steal our furniture.
Right.
And so I think there's a part of her, if she didn't do it, and she knows she didn't do it, there's a part of her that thinks Darren did it.
I would even take that a step farther and say there's a part of her that knows exactly. That may have been the last puzzle piece to like click and be like, whoa, I didn't even know this person I was living with. You know what I mean? I could see that.
Yeah. For everyone listening, I hope that this story and everything we said came out cohesively. And I hope that we got all the evidence, and we may have missed some stuff, but look it up. Look up this case online. Check it out, because it's crazy. And it's something that, when we first started researching this case, Stefan was like, "Man, this is worse than Casey Anthony." And it's like, it sort of is, because it's sort of the same thing, except it's even more weird than Casey Anthony.
Yeah, it's way muddier than Casey. Yeah. With Casey Anthony, we were like, she did it.
Yeah, that's so true, because everyone thinks Casey Anthony did it.
Right.
And she probably did, right? And
yeah, that was fair enough.
That was like 10 episodes ago.
Right.
So she probably did it, right? But with this one, it's like not everyone thinks that. Not everyone thinks that.
I don't know what to think. Usually I'm a black or white sort of person. Yeah. I know yes or no. This one, I don't know.
I'm leaning towards that she just did it.
Same.
I can't tell you why, and I can't give a good motive, which people, of course, always use in court. You have to have a good motive. You don't even have a motive, what can you say? But I don't think that's true. I think it sometimes can be hard to understand why people do certain things. I think most of the evidence points to her doing it. And this is the case where we're in Texas and she's going to be killed. So it's another one of those things where if everyone's so wishy-washy about it, it's kind of weird that we're going to put her to death, But especially in Texas, because we've kept her on death row for over 20 years, it doesn't make any sense,
right? I think eventually she will get to the point. Maybe information will come out. You know what I mean? There's still time. I think that's really what they're waiting for, is more information to come out. But, we'll keep you guys posted if any updates come out about the case. But
do we miss anything? Is there anything else you can think of for this case?
Not really. I think we covered as much as I remember.
The damn sock.
The sock.
Yeah. Anyone listening, Google search Darlie Routier Reddit. Just Google search those 3 words. There's some awesome threads on different subreddits. The main one is for unsolved mysteries. It's a subreddit on r/unsolved mysteries. Just look that up and read through this. And some people have some pretty interesting ideas, especially on Reddit. Reddit's like this huge source of everything for me, but you can find a bunch of really interesting stuff about this case on there.
Another interesting sock thought I had was whenever I saw, compared to the amount of blood that was at the crime scene, when you see this sock, it has a drip of blood on it. I just thought that was weird.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting.
Compared to when you see the carpets to this house, they are covered. It is crazy.
How'd that sock get there? It doesn't make any sense, man. There's no way. If an intruder, so the thing is, if we go with the intruder story and the intruder broke in, left the fucking weapon that he used, and accidentally took a sock, there is no way that happened. I'm sorry, but that did not happen.
It sounds really ridiculous when you just said that.
And then even if the intruder comes in and all of this is true and he didn't take the sock out there, why is the sock there then? It's like that the intruder story doesn't match that sock regardless. It just doesn't match up. That sock being there and the intruder story, those two things cannot exist. I don't believe so in the same universe. They just can't. They just don't work that way.
Right.
And it just doesn't make sense. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
Well, next week we're talking about something that is way less, I think, controversial way easier to talk about, so it'll probably be slightly shorter. But next week we are talking about Gary Ridgway, or the Green River Killer.
I'm excited for this one, man.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's really crazy. I've been doing a lot of research for it over the last week or so, and this dude killed a bunch of women. He was convicted of 49 murders, and he said that he killed at least 91, and he says that he could figure out where 71 of the bodies are.
That's crazy.
And, you know, he originally went out with, after he was convicted and sentenced, he went out to help find some of the bodies of some of the women. So I think they recovered 71 bodies, and this is not made up. Like, this isn't speculation. These are people that he killed.
Right, confirmed.
I mean, he
numbers.
says that he killed so many people that he doesn't remember most of them. He lost count. He doesn't remember faces or names or anything.
Wow.
I mean, he was killing people, what was it, once a week, twice a month or something, 3 times a month?
I think they said for at least 1 month he killed 5 people in a month.
Yeah, it was March of 84. Anyways, let's not get too far into it, but they found
Right.
5 bodies from March of 84. So next week is a crazy episode. Yeah, so definitely check in. Again, send us an email at thestrangelandpodcast@gmail.com. I'd really appreciate it. Check us out on, Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Castbox, basically any of the podcast apps. Our website is strangelandpod.com. And yeah, check us out on Facebook and YouTube. If you just search up the Strangeland Podcast, we will come up.
Yeah, make sure if you're watching on YouTube, drop a like for sure and a comment. Let us know.
Definitely. Send us emails.
Yeah,
I want to read emails.
we want to hear it all.
Yeah, definitely. All right, everyone. Good night.
Night, guys.
Treat in your